Starting it up. Starting from the get-go.
Round
Firehouse
two.
Vigilance, weekly scrap, number 33, James Johnson. Thank you for putting up with the technical difficulty there. We'll try this one more time. Hopefully I won't mess it up. That was on me. And thank you for being a guest on the weekly scrap. I'm anxious to pick your brain on building construction and current events. And so take a few seconds, introduce yourself, and we'll get this going.
Awesome. Yeah, so James Johnson. I work up in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. I've been there, worked for Vancouver since beginning of 2011 and started out in the fire service 2003 as kind of an on-call firefighter. And yeah, last number of years, I've worked in our rescue company. And we were just saying before that I just got notified that I'm going to be going down to, we have one station that's kind of like the skids,
Right.
kind of our busiest station. And so they do 1 year rotations of guys where they'll pull them through. And so I'm going there for my 1 year stint, starting 2 weeks from now. So
2 weeks from now. So right,
yeah, so it'll be good times. So
how long were you on the rescue? Did you enjoy the rescue?
yeah, I love all that stuff. I've been in that program 4.5 years,
Okay.
I guess now. And yeah, so we do all the technical rescue stuff and yeah, really. So as soon as my year is done, I'll go back to that.
Awesome.
But yeah, love that stuff a lot.
So you just got to do your time in the skids.
Yeah, it's kind of just because the call volume there, they were experiencing burnout. Basically,
Sure.
we have a big opioid pandemic going on there. So, I think it was a couple of years ago now, they started cycling people through with just 1 year time.
That's awesome. They look out for the burnout on that, that kind of just the high call volume station. That's awesome that they rotate.
And they do a pretty good job too of like it's not a wholesale crew change. They'll it's staggered, so half the crew will be there for a little bit longer and so looking forward to it. It'll be a good year.
No, that's awesome. The current state. So you're going straight from dealing with coronavirus for the last 2 months, straight to its new stationary assignment. How has the pandemic been affecting you guys up there in Vancouver? And
I'm sure it's probably same most places. Like we've had major shutdowns of most businesses and so yeah, it's definitely seen a shift in our call volume. We run so we're not an integrated service as far as EMS. We're first responders. And so, but we have a provincial run. So the province of BC does all the ambulance service. They do transport, ALS, they do everything. So what they did is when this whole thing happened, they wanted to limit the amount of exposure to emergency workers. So they actually cut down a lot of the call volume. So we're only responding to the most urgent kind of calls. So
the medical.
Yeah, so medical calls kind of went down, but we've actually seen a pretty good rise in fires lately. So we're numbers are quite a bit higher than they were last year at this time. So that's been, as a fireman, that's always good.
Always exciting for us, even though, yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's different everywhere as far as just the response model and things like that. Everybody's call volume has gone down as everybody's shuttered themselves, and so. It's just a different world, and I'm sure everybody's ready for it to kind of have I don't know if we'll ever get back to normal, but just return to what's going to be normal.
Yeah.
So I want to dive right in and jump on to building construction, and I'll just throw a big question at you right out the gate: is what do you think is the biggest misconception or about building construction right now in the modern fire service?
I don't know what the biggest misconception is, but I think sometimes we have our priorities wrong as far as the education towards building construction. I think a lot of times we maybe focus too much on specific things. Like I talk a lot about lightweight and kind of engineered modern construction, and I think sometimes we spend too much time talking about things that are potential risks or potential hazards when we miss a lot of the stuff that happens all the time. I know Aaron Fields has I remember listening to Fields talk, and he was saying when he trains firefighters, he wants to start with what always happens, like, focus on the skill sets of what's always going to happen every time, and then move towards the one-offs or
Sure.
the advanced skill set. And I kind of think that with building construction as well. Let's look at how materials fail 95% of the time,
Right.
and then move into that that 5% range.
Ooh, I love that.
So I think a lot of times, like when you see people teach about building construction, or if you look at the academy model in a lot of ways, they'll teach you the 5 types of construction. You'll talk about different materials, and then they do case studies of all the worst case scenarios that happened. And so, we miss a big portion of, how these things fail majority of the time.
Right.
And I think that's a little bit of a misstep, and doesn't do, the civilians or us any good.
No, absolutely. And you touched on type 1 through 5, and that's a big thing. I kind of look at them like they are designed for code enforcement. They're more designed for the safety of the civilian and the building the actual building of it, but not so much with us in mind when it's burning, although we benefit from it. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Is there a better tool to use that firefighters could start with, or is 1 through 5 the best we got?
I'm kind of torn with this, because the 1 through 5 gives you a benchmark. So if you know that you're up against, say, a type 3, an ordinary constructed, unreinforced masonry building, you can predict, some failure modes, or you have an idea of what you're up against.
Right.
But the biggest thing for us with 5 types of construction is kind of over the last, decade and a half, our building codes have changed pretty drastically. So building codes used to be prescriptive. So if I was building, say, a Walmart, I would have certain materials that I would have to use for that area and the size. So typically it would be a non-combustible or a type 2 building.
Okay.
So what's happened now is building codes have moved towards being more performance or objective based. So if I'm a structural engineer, I'm designing a building, and say I want to replace a big steel beam with a wood beam, if I can prove equivalency from a fire performance standpoint, I can do my big engineering stamp on it and sign off on it, and then now it's kind of allowed in code. So almost the newer codes put more responsibility on the engineer, the designer.
Okay.
And so what that ends up being for us is buildings don't fall into these cookie cutter 5 types anymore. Very often now we see like a huge wide range of materials, and so the example I like to use is, in the last place I lived, I had a commercial car wash that was being built right down the road from where I live. So every time I'd go to work, I'd drive past it. Mm-hmm. So the first thing they did was they put up a tilt slab concrete wall, and that was the fire separation between the building next to it. So then the next thing they did was they put a cast in core concrete kind of center in the inside of it, and then put a bunch of steel beams and columns, and then the rest of it was all lightweight wood eye joists and engineered beams. So what type of construction is that? Literally, it has every material that we have. So I think when we get into situations like that, we can set ourselves up for failure if we look at, what a car wash, which traditionally would be a type 2 constructed building. Right. For the most part, now we have, lighter weight wood components, or just a whole host of things that are going to react differently under fire conditions. So
do you think it really just comes down to knowing your district and as much as possible? Is there anything that replaces that? It
really is the biggest thing. It's kind of funny that we're talking about this today. I wrote an article for Fire Rescue magazine about 2 years ago now, and they just reposted it and reshared it today.
Okay.
But it's talking about building size up, and I talk kind of about this topic. So there's a few things that I'm not a company officer. I'm just a dumb firefighter on the back of the rig.
Right.
But when I'm rolling up, my mindset is I'm looking at the size of the building. I'm looking at the age of the building, because that's going to dictate, certain materials and different design characteristics. Then I'm looking at the use of the building, and I'm looking at the materials. Those are kind of the four things that are running through my mind. So if I roll up to a single family home that was built in 1905, I'm going to look, it's going to be a small single family residential house. I know I'm probably going to have balloon frame or, conventional construction on it. And I know it's going to be primarily wood. So that's kind of my, those things that I'm looking at. If I'm rolling up to a brand new big box store, that's going to be a large building for size. For use is going to be commercial, like a commercial occupancy. So that's going to dictate my occupancy when I'm thinking about search or rescue, and depending on the time of day. And it's also going to tell, going to have an idea of what kind of materials are inside of it. Then from the material standpoint, I'm going to try and determine if it's tilt-up construction or if it's concrete masonry units, or kind of what the structural makeup of it is. And then the age of it's going to be modern. So I know I'm going to have modern materials. So that's kind of how I like to look at it.
Those four are pretty nice, and they give you a good framework to start planning whatever you need to start planning, whether strategy, tactics you're going to be using.
And then again, it depends on your level of building construction knowledge. Like I'm a big geek with this stuff. So I might be able to narrow an age down of a building to a smaller margin than maybe the average firefighter might be able to. But if you can separate, just from the age perspective, if you can separate modern and legacy, and kind of even just break it down in simple, commercial or residential, small, medium, large, and then try and identify some of the structural materials.
Sure.
You're off to a pretty good start, right there.
And game.
For sure.
No, that's awesome. The tilt-up construction, you are a tilt-up construction guy, right? Correct? I'm not mistaken in that?
Yeah, so when I did my carpentry apprenticeship, we did a bunch of tilt-up buildings. So yeah, I've done quite a few of them.
But as far as those go, they seem pretty stable. Is the biggest danger just the roof, the type? I've seen some with wood, and it blows my mind sometimes that I guess there's a case study, The Art of Reading Buildings. I don't know if you know the book or not, but
Great book.
The right at the beginning of it, they do that case study of a small fire that happens in a I don't know if it was a tilt-up building, but had the wooden engineered I-joists, I-beams up top, and very small fire load of rubbish in there that almost destroyed 3 or 4 of them up top, and that's always stuck with me from that book of, man, get in there and get in your district and see what those are made of.
Yeah. The big thing with the tilt-up buildings is, if there's any takeaway, is the roof system is basically what holds the walls in the vertical position. So they're not, like, in some places, like if you're on the West Coast, there'll be some seismic considerations where for earthquakes, essentially, that tie it down a little bit better. But if you're on the East Coast or the Midwest or anything like that, a lot of times it's just a little bit of like a few weld plates at the bottom, or tying in some rebar to the wall. That's the only way that wall is tied into the slab or the foundation. So it really relies on that diaphragm on the roof for keeping the walls. So, and you did mention wood. So there's a few, like on the West Coast, so a little bit in Washington State, a little bit in Oregon, tons in California, tons in Arizona, tons in Nevada. They use a system called a panelized wood roof. And a lot of times those will be on tilt-up buildings in those kind of areas.
Right on.
And it's basically a lightweight panelized system in commercial occupancies. But it's really a West Coast thing. If you go anywhere kind of east of Arizona, you don't really see it anywhere.
Okay. No, fascinating to me. I'm working on a presentation. I say working on it because it's been a project that's been going on for probably 18 months or so, and it's called Building Construction for Dummies. And I'm slowly becoming grabbing these factoids and putting them into these slides and building it slowly. And the whole purpose behind it is to the younger generations coming in just haven't done the construction that the generations before them were involved in, the trades. And that's not a knock or anything. It's a different world they grew up in. and that's what the whole purpose is to kind of to raise their floor a little bit on building construction. Because like again, I I am not a building construction genius, but compared to someone who's never touched it, I know quite a bit, and that's the only place.
Yeah, so it's definitely, and that's a lot of the reason why I started teaching and doing the stuff that I do was just seeing a knowledge gap. And like you said, it's no knock to anybody. A lot of the people coming into the fire service that we're hiring have, one or two college degrees. They're much smarter than I am. Just have a little bit of a different background. So.
No doubt. Brian Dunfield asks you a question. He says, thoughts on podium construction as far as type?
So podium for me is going to be a type 5 wood frame, but just multifamily. So for anyone who's listening to this that doesn't know, podium construction's basically referring to 1 or 2 stories of commercial or concrete underneath. And then I know in Canada we can go up to 6, or in British Columbia we can go up to 6 stories. Washington State, I believe, is 5 stories of wood over 2 stories of concrete. And then it varies throughout the United States, how high you can go. Some states only allow you to go 3 stories above the concrete, I believe. And so it kind of varies, but that's still a type 5 for me. But my personal size up is, I know that my bottom 2 stories, or my bottom story that's going to be the commercial, I know that I'm dealing with a little bit of a different animal from a fire spread perspective than I am if I go up higher.
Right on. So. Okay. So, and this is me. I grew up in the fire service. I hired on in 97. Lightweight construction, all I heard is burns faster, collapses sooner. It's glue. It's not nails. There's gusset plates. It's smaller, less or higher surface to mass ratio. All those things I've heard since I hired on. And I know Facts But Fear addresses a lot of these. And so just touch on some of that and some of your message in that regard.
So one thing I'll be fully transparent with, it does fail faster for the most part. Like I always use something in my classes. I talk and I say mass over math. So like for firefighters, we want mass. We want big structural members over using over using math or engineering principles. That's, anything bigger. If you have more mass in a structural member, it's going to have more fire resistive qualities to it for the most part. So lightweight construction will fail faster than a conventional material. But I think one of the big things we're missing is what that gap is between the failure rates of conventional and the failure rates of lightweight. And sometimes I think we miss the mark with what our worries are. So for example, if we're talking about a roof, there's lots of houses that are built now using conventional framing. They're conventionally framed roofs, and you have lightweight truss roofs. Well, the decking material or the sheathing is the exact same, regardless of if it's a conventional roof or a lightweight roof. And the decking or the sheathing is going to be the component that, 99.9 times out of 10 or 99.9 percent of the time is going to fail first. So sometimes I think we focus too much on the gusset plate or the truss, and we miss the discussion of, if you're going to the roof, proper sounding or understanding that the decking is going to be the failure point. Right. So that's some of the stuff I think I don't think we're focusing sometimes on the right part. We talk about the gusset plates, we talk about the trusses, which can contribute to issues, but sometimes we need to think about the bigger picture and what are the things that are going to fail first.
Right on. No, it goes right back to what you said at the beginning, focusing on the 95% and then talking about the 5%.
Yeah. Like, one example that I always use is, there's a video, out that NIST did a test out of Phoenix. They did some burns where they did 3 different roof styles, 3 different roof coverings, and they were all trusses, and they had them burn. And then they had firefighters, like simulated firefighters dummies on the roof. And then they terminated the test when the firefighter fell through. So in the whole video in the test, like the firefighters, you can clearly see in the videos, they were situated on the decking in between the truss spacing. So when they fails, you can see them fail right through the sheathing. But so it's like an example like that where, you can clearly see that it was the decking or the sheathing that was the failure mode or the failure point, but we don't talk about that. We just talk about the truss part of it. So, a company that's up there that's sounding properly and looking for all those, changing in conditions are going to recognize those things before they get into a compromised position.
No, absolutely.
So,
No, absolutely. I don't have a lot of experience with LVLs. In fact, me and my dad, we built his house over the last few years, kind of a father-son project. But it blew my mind, these laminated beams we use to span this huge distance in their living room. And how do those hold up in fire conditions from your research and things like that?
So there's a couple things to kind of consider with that is just like anything, like any kind of technology, building construction technology changes and advances and gets better and better. And so although we sometimes use more engineering principles where we can reduce the mass of certain things, we also increase the quality. And one of those things is the adhesives that they use. And so I know, I remember years ago hearing about engineered construction and then adhesives and hearing at 300 degrees they're off gassing and starting to degrade. But a lot of times, if you look at the actual testing reports from things like LVL or LSL or any of those structural composite lumber products, a lot of times the wood fibers are actually igniting before the adhesives are.
Oh, wow.
Just because the adhesive standards have changed so much. So what is a pretty widely acceptable take on this stuff is if the mass is equal. So if I take say a 2-inch by 12-inch just straight up wood beam, and I take a 2-inch by 12-inch say a laminated strand lumber beam, and I burn them, they're going to burn at relatively the same time.
Okay.
So they're going to burn and char. So it all comes down to the mass. So if mass is equal, I'm not overly concerned with engineered materials, just because of the way that they burn and char, and you have that mass. The problem is when we start getting into things where traditionally we would have, a large beam, and we're able to replace it with something that's made with truss construction where the mass is small. So, but a lot of those things, you can actually look it up too, say laminated strand lumber. If you look up that and look at some of the trade, like the companies that make it, they'll show you the testing reports, like which fire tests they've actually gone through, and you can look up what temperatures and they hold up really well. One of the other advantages with that too is when you have an engineered product, it takes away all the imperfections that you would have in normal lumber. And so, a kind of an eye-opening thing for me was a couple of years ago, we went to Texas A&M University. We did a structural collapse course there, and we built a bunch of shoring that we would use to shore up a collapsed building. Right. And on the last day, we took it into the engineering lab. And they have these huge hydraulic presses, and we made them fail. And every single one of the shores that we built failed at a defect in the lumber. Okay. So it failed at either a knot or a split or a wane. And so a lot of times the lumber quality is quite poor that we're seeing in framing lumber. And that's, those are going to be the points that are going to fail first. Sure. Where if I have an engineered piece, it's just, it's smaller pieces of lumber where those imperfections are not in the equation. So that's why they have stronger or they have higher strength ratings and things like that.
No, absolutely. And so like you said before, if the mass is equal, then you're not concerned at all. It's when the math replaces the mass is when you start.
Yeah.
Okay. No, that's good.
Yeah. And that's just where I'm going to start to think about things, a little bit more when I know that I'm dealing with what, may have been a traditional, 2x10 or 2x12 floor. And now I've got something like wood eye joists that may be unprotected. Then I know that I'm going to have less time on that floor system.
Right on.
So,
no, that's great. Does the span, the distance that they're able to cover now with some of that engineered stuff, does that concern you more at all or not really?
A little bit as far as open span. Like there's like say you have a 2x10, like a lot of times spacing, like you can't span more than say 14, 16, probably 14 feet with a 2x10, where you replace that with a wood eye joist of the same depth. Now you can get well over 20 feet. So there's going to be less compartments underneath, and those bigger spans can create an issue just with the loads up above. But one thing kind of to think about in the equation as well is in the International Building Code. So for everyone kind of listening from the United States, which I'm sure is most people, there was a big code change in 2009 where in most states you're no longer allowed to have unfinished basements. So you're going to have drywall or sheetrock on the underside of any lightweight floor systems. And so that was actually came partially as a result from a line of duty death out of Green Bay, Wisconsin.
Gotcha.
That kind of got the wheels in motion to get that changed.
Get that enforced.
Mm-hmm.
What was my question? So the 4 things, I want to touch on those again. You start with age, when you can identify it. Second one was material.
Yep. Yep. You can, age. Or so I always start with size. It's my first one that I'm looking at, because that's something, and I always joke about this because a lot of places will use. I don't know if you guys do this, but do you give like a actual measurement? Like some people will be like, I've got an 80 by 120 building.
Not on our on-scene report or anything.
So like that's something that I see quite a bit, and I always joke. There's only really two types of people that are good at that. They're like bow hunters or golfers. They're like everyone else is totally off with their rough dimensions that they give.
Right.
I start with size, and I use small, medium, and large. And it may seem like it's an oversimplification, but when you tie that into what the building is used for, it makes sense. So
absolutely.
If I've got a commercial building, everybody's got an idea in their city what a small commercial building, what a medium, what a large is. Same with houses. Everyone's got an idea of what a small, medium, and large house is. And even more so when you say what the age is. If I've got an older or a legacy small house, for most of us, we're probably thinking that, 800 to 1,000 square foot, 1905 box house or something along those lines.
Right.
Yeah. So that's, So I start with age, start with size, then I move to age. Then I want to try and identify the materials, and then I'm going to think about the use of the building. So that's kind of the way I look.
4-part size up. I love that.
and you reference the art of reading buildings. That's very similar to what Mittendorf and Dodson talk about. They kind of lay out something very similar to that, and in how they identify buildings. So
yes. I like it. I always like to touch on books, and if there's anything you want to add on building construction, feel free. Anything you want to talk about. I'm not trying to cut you off at all, but I always like to talk about a book that you think firefighters should read. And so go for it. What is your book suggestion?
So I like them all the ones that are building construction related. Dodson and Mittendorf's is good. I'm still always a lifelong fan of the Brannigan books. But my favorite book right now is actually not a fire service related one. It's called Building Construction Illustrated, and it's by Francis Ching. And it's you can get it on Amazon for I think $40. Okay. I think the sixth edition just came out. But I believe he's an architectural draftsman, and so it's basically a picture book. So it's all drawings of everything. They talk about soil and foundations and trusses and you name it, it's in there. And then there's pictures, so it'll describe it and then show it, kind of have the hand, that architectural drawings of it. And it's not the type of book that you're going to sit down and pour a cup of coffee and read from cover to cover, but it's a good thing if you hear a term that you're not familiar with, or you want to know what something looks like, you can look through there and find most things. So
no, that's awesome.
So that's a really
book, so firefighters are going to love it.
Yeah, exactly. If you can, I always joke, if you can keep from eating the crayons, you can even color it, and
Right.
so it's a good one. It's reasonable. The one downside to the fire service related books is they can be quite pricey.
No
Where
doubt.
this book, you can get it on Amazon for $40, somewhere in that range.
No, I'm definitely going to add it to the collection. And like you said, it's
Mm-hmm.
not one I'm going to sit down and try and read cover to cover, so I can just sit there and reference it at my leisure and
Mm-hmm.
make it for a grade. All right, so this is a new thing I've been doing. 5 questions for firefighters. Okay, and it's kind of just a rapid fire thing. I'm collecting it, and I'm coming up with better questions as we go along. But are you ready for it?
Yes.
All right, here we go. Number 1. What is the number 1 issue facing the modern fire service?
I would say probably just the amount of information that we're thrown at. Like if you're at all involved with social media, it is just an onslaught of information coming at us, and a lot of it isn't. A lot of it may not be peer reviewed or tried and true information, and we've seen that lots with things coming out maybe too early, and then having to backstep a little bit. So
Sure.
I think that's a big issue is information coming out and then maybe people jumping on it too quick without kind of
No, there's a
verifying
ton
it
of
or-
opinions. A ton of opinions. That's
yeah,
beautiful.
I like the Elkhart Brass kind of banner. I don't know if you've seen the banner where it's like that quote, like we're drowning information but starving for wisdom.
Yes.
I think that's pretty true for what you see out there.
And all the brass tacks, hard facts videos are so they're so high quality and such a great. I could talk about those for a while.
I know. Yeah, they've hit a home run.
Oh, there's no doubt. Number 2, what is the thing you are most excited about for the future of firefighting?
I'm really stoked right now just on the big push just to get back to basics. And it's I just all the old time guys would probably laugh and be like, oh, it's not a new push to get back to basics, but from a lot of the perspective, it is like you saw big changes with some of the or proposed changes with some of the data that came out, and then we get further along in some of the stuff, and you see that it's just the old classic. Give me a smoothbore nozzle, and just I kind of like
fire.
It's just I think we've maybe sometimes overcomplicated things a little bit, and I'm really excited to see kind of just that back to basics, like
Go full circle.
Yeah. There's things that work, and they work for a reason.
No, absolutely, tried and true. And it's funny when you see one of those social media posts. It's like it's just a little bit of text talking about basically flow path, but it's written in like 1895 or something.
Yeah.
It's nothing new to the fire service. Number 3, best ranked position to be in the fire service.
Oh, definitely just a fireman. That's
pipe.
the best. You don't have anything to think about. You just do your job, but I can only say because that's all I've been. So
it's hard to argue with, man. That's a really good answer. Number 4, best advice you have ever received, fire related or life related, your choice.
Oh, best advice I ever received was actually I was a paid on call firefighter right out of high school, like as soon as I graduated, and I knew I wanted to be a firefighter for that's all I wanted to do at that time. And I had one of the captains said, I was 18 years old, and he's like, go get some life experience, go get some education. And that's when I went to trade school and became a journeyman carpenter and did my apprenticeship and all that. And then that's helped me just immensely. So
No doubt.
that's probably one of the best kind of pieces of advice I got, because it, that's why I do the stuff that I do now. And
you can see the progression from it. That's awesome.
Yeah. So that would definitely be the answer to that one.
All right. Final question, number 5, which is heavy fire and tenable space. Would you rather be assigned to the nozzle or first in on VES?
VES.
Every time. That's it. I don't think anyone...
Do I have a hard time with this though, because I work the rescue. I love that stuff. But I've been involved with, like, I was involved with testing all of our hose for our high rise, our new high rise stuff. And been, I love engine work as well. So I love it all. So that's a tough one, but it's hard to, it'd be hard to pass up a good VES.
No, I can't knock it, man. No, I can't knock that answer whatsoever. I don't think anyone's taking the nozzle over the VES, so I'm gonna have to rework that question to get something that competes. Now you piqued my interest there with, you said you're involved in the testing of the high rise stuff. So I want to pick your brain for just a sec if you got a minute. Which is, what did you guys decide? We only have mid rise. Like our highest thing is 6 stories, so we call ours a mid rise. But what did you guys decide on for your high rise pack?
So I can't speak fully for it. So I was involved in the testing of the hose. So all the hose came in, but I didn't make it actually onto the high rise committee. It was all seniority based. Okay. So I didn't make it on for for the actual picking of stuff. But I think what they ended up going with, and we haven't rolled it out quite yet, is 2-inch. Okay. For our hose. And reason being is we've had residential sprinklers in the city of Vancouver since the mid-90s requirement. You can't build a new house without residential sprinklers. And so we've had very aggressive sprinkler kind of enforcement. And so when you look at a lot of our high rises, we have over 500 high rises in our downtown core. We're a very vertical city. Wow. But they looked at the majority of the fires that we go to, they kind of took that all into consideration. And the majority of them are sprinkler activated, residential, fairly small in nature. And we, not a lot of pre 1993. So, we're dealing with decent pressures. Yeah. So they found that I think the consensus was that the 2-inch would give us kind of the best all around. And so I think what the latest talk was to go with a stack tip. So you could have that 1 1/8, and then you could have a 7/8 or a 15/16, and then spin it off if you need the higher flow. Gotcha. But it still hasn't rolled out yet. So we tested everything, which was pretty fun. I got to be there from, basically had. That's
awesome, man. No, there's
every kind of awesome.
We've been flipping discs on our we have fog nozzle but we've been flipping discs trying to just mess with pressures and flows and measuring it all. It's just so much fun to actually get on it. And
I actually had a pretty good on Halloween night. This past Halloween, I was working in our downtown, working on a downtown engine company, and we had a high-rise fire in a 16th floor, 1960s unsprinklered building. Oh, wow. It was good. Like, we went up, pretty clean hallway, dry stretch in the hall. I was on the nozzle. Had to knee walk in to get into position because it was around a half wall. So every time we'd hit it, it would just come right back. So I had to knee walk to get around it. It was kind of pick up a shift and end up on the pipe for a high rise fire. Doesn't happen to every day. That's
the best one.
It was pretty good. So, but again, we were lucky there. Good. The first in crew was really good. Got us good pressure. Right away. So
that's awesome.
Yeah, went pretty smooth.
Now, was that a 2-inch or was that hasn't been implemented yet?
No,
Are you still on the inch?
No. So it was like the typical 1.88, the 15/16 tip. So it was a small, like 600 square foot apartment. So it was definitely would have been nice to have a big line, but we got her done with what we had.
No, that's awesome. I love it. Anything you got going on right now? Anything you want to plug? I know FDIC got, of course, everything's shut down right now, but anything you got going on or any way people can get a hold of you? The best way to get people to get a hold of you?
Yeah, so you can, I've got like a Facebook page that I release some stuff on. So I think it's like FF Firefighter James Johnson. And my email's jamestylerjohnson@live.com if you want to reach out to me for anything. I don't really have anything going on. That's the one thing with the whole COVID-19 pandemic is I had a really busy spring, going a bunch of different places, FDIC and a bunch of conferences. And then basically within a 72-hour window, it was, there was nothing. So just gone. So But it's been good. It's it's not the worst thing in the world to kind of have some downtime, be able to reevaluate kind of what you want to do. But
Sure.
yeah, so yeah, that's probably the best way to reach out to me if anyone has any questions or anything.
Ed, brother, it's been a pleasure to talk to you about this stuff. I could do it for another 2-3 hours, and I wouldn't want to. I appreciate you coming on the Weekly Scrap. Number 33, James Johnson. You've been an unbelievably good guest. Coming up next week, Chief Jason Hovelman, be talking to him about leadership in the fire service. And then later on in May, Mike Gagliano. And so that's coming up. This week, of course, James Johnson, unbelievably good guest. Thank you, sir, for coming on.
Awesome. Thanks a lot for having me.
Everybody out there, I hope the tone stays silent unless it's burning. So stay safe out there. Thank you, brother.
Thanks.